Good morning, colleagues, South African time. I'm here to do the welcoming remarks, and I will just do exactly that. So, colleagues, the theme for our World Food Day commemoration for 2022 is finding pathways towards agroecological transitions in Africa under the banner of FSNet-Africa project. This theme is our plan of action of one, people, planet, and prosperity, which in some ways means profit. The words that I want to underscore are we are about finding pathways. And therefore, the opening session that I'm welcoming you to is about partnerships for sustainable and equitable food production. When developing these catalytic solutions, in my view, then we need to have co-creation in our mind. And therefore, we are saying that we want to create these pathways, this solution in partnership. If we want to go for it alone, we won't make impact, but we are doing this in partnership to make sure that we deliver impact which is wider and impactful. Before I get carried away in terms of unpacking this theme, I am here to welcome you. So I have got few people that have been told that if I don't acknowledge them, then I will lose my job. Prof. Alice Pearl, you're going to give our keynote address, and we really appreciate for you traveling all the way from the US to come to be with us. She's from University of Cornell. Prof. Gillian May, who is also a colleague at the National Planning Commission, then in our daily job there, we call each other commissioners, so here is just a professor, then representing DSI NRF Center of Excellence in Food Security. My colleagues from Ghana, representing Arua, Dr. Emmanuel Abi, you are welcome. I'm also then told that if I don't welcome the other presenters from the coming two sessions, I will not have done justice to my welcoming. So colleagues who are going to present after session one, you are also welcome, and we're really waiting for your valuable contribution. Our dear participants who are participating here physically, but more so those that are joining us virtually, we are welcoming you and we are waiting for your contribution. Being virtually does not mean that you're not supposed to contribute. When we have exhausted question and answers here in the plenary, then we'll open up for you to participate. Ladies and gentlemen, about the issue that we are about to attend today, the right of food requires that food be available, accessible, and adequate for everyone. But not just food. People should eat healthy and balanced diets. And I need to listen to this one. Produced from a healthy planet. That's why we are having this theme today. There are two things that I need to pay attention to. Why World Food Day? It is disheartening that millions of food around the globe then are still going to bed hungry. And for us, we thought to ourselves that what is it that we can do? We thought that we need to promote and create awareness, to stimulate action, to make sure that those are going to bed hungry, then are able to access the food that I spoke about earlier, that it is not about food only, but the food must be nutritious. So why about the second component, which is about agroecology? When producing food, agroecology helps to protect, restore, and improve agriculture and food systems. And this is against the backdrop of changing and variable climate. Our presenters here are going to help unpack this topical issue, because we are about asking the question, which policy interventions, scientific research, and agricultural practices are there and able to promote agroecological transitions? In conclusion, who is our host and who is the convener? The convener is FSNet-Africa. What is it designed to do? It is designed to make sure that we are implementing food system research in partnership with stakeholders, to identify, one, solutions that can bring about sustainable change, And number two, to make sure that co-creation is at the center stage of the work that we do, because we cannot just then set our research agenda, but we need then to embed this research on the practical things that are impacting our food system. The centerpiece of this project is about the 20 earlier career researchers, and I'm proud to say 80% of these are female, which I think we need to applaud for that. And then these are from 10 African academic partners and from 6 countries that are represented here. We are about building capacity for African-focused food system research and developing long-term partnership for a research that spans across sectors and geographies. And the other thing that I think we need to pay attention to is that we are about implementing transdisciplinary research. We are not about attending to these interconnected challenges in silos, but we are implementing transdisciplinary research. Coming now to the end, FSNet project is led by 3 institutions, FANAPAN, which I represent, University of Pretoria and University of Leeds in the UK. And we also need to appreciate our funding partners who are the Research Excellence, then FSNet is a Research Excellence project funded by the Global Challenges Research Fund, GCRF, under the partnership between UK Research Innovation and the African Research Universities Alliance, ARUA. Then I've been told that those who are participating need to make sure that they partake in the messages that we are generating here. And the hashtag is FSNet-Africa WFD, representing World Food Day, is then message, hashtag FSNet-Africa WFD message. Then you can then follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Colleagues, I was here to just welcome you, not to lecture you about agroecology. Presenters here are going to lecture you about that. Thank you so much.
Commissioner TM. As planners, I will be providing you now with the slides with the notes of what Shalidzi has just said, so that you can write it all down. My name is Julian May. I'm the Director of the Centre of Excellence in Food Security at the University of Western Cape, and also an associate of the University of Pretoria, a research fellow at the University of Pretoria myself, and I'm in that capacity presenting to you today. You've been reminded of the Twitter hashtag, so again, you've got an opportunity to use the social media, so please, I hope you took the note, the hashtag down, but if not, raise your hand and I've got the details here as well. My task is to do 2 things: to remind you of the details of FSNet, and then to spend a bit of time dwelling on why we've chosen a transition to agroecology, and to explain what we mean by that. I think one of the reasons, in addition to the points that Shalidzi made, that we felt we should focus on this topic is it's also very badly understood. There are many misconceptions about what agroecology is, and there are sometimes, I think, false information has been put out about what we're trying to achieve with an approach such as this. Okay, so Shalidzi has reminded you of the goal of the FSNet network, and it is particularly that focus on strengthening food systems and doing it in a way that builds capacity, and also doing it in a way that not only builds capacity, that brings together people from diverse disciplines. And finally, there's this question of partnership, of co-creation of knowledge, recognizing that we need to work with one another, but also with those that are going to make use of our information. It's not sufficient to be in this nice campus if we're not reaching out to those that are able to make decisions and influence change. The approach then is interdisciplinary, and it's about a 2-year structured program, quite intense, in which early career researchers are brought together with a host at the University of Pretoria, a mentor that will be at another university, and work together in a sense as a 3-legged pot, as a poiki, trying to build knowledge together and trying to advance and develop each other's skills. So very much what the ambition is, at the end of this, we should have a new generation of food system scholars. The core partners have been mentioned. I think it's a very powerful core that brings together institutions that are involved in learning as well as those that are involved in networking. And that again is a somewhat unusual combination. Too often we have networks that are only about those that focus on the universities and don't think about how are we going to get that message communicated. The partners are scattered across the continent. Well, as I was grumbling about on the bus earlier, across what we're told is our continent, which tends to be sub-Saharan Africa, I look forward to the day that we're seeing partners in North Africa, in Tunisia or Algeria, and think more of what it actually is our continent. My university, the University of Western Cape, is represented as one of those partners, even though we don't in fact have a Department of Agriculture. We contribute from the perspectives of economics, data science, and also plant sciences. So it brings together that very diverse network of people into one structure. The fellowships then are a structured program. I'm quite struck by the intensity of the work that is expected of the mentor, of the host, and of the fellow themselves. It's very organized in a way that hopes to build what is said here are lasting research networks. One of the key assets that people don't tell you about when you start out as your career as a young researcher is the fact that you need friends. You need peers that you like, that you think together, that you may in fact disagree with, but you can debate, you can argue, you can build your knowledge, and that's a very important part of the FSNet component. It's building that peer network across the continent that will probably stay with these researchers for the remainder of their careers. There's a price tag, though. The expectation is that a fellow must produce at least one peer-reviewed publication, and usually then there's a policy output. Great, you've got your publication, that's going to help you become an associate professor or a full professor at some point. But now it's about how do you translate that in a way that someone who's making a decision is able to make sense of what it is that you're saying. It's recognizing that policymakers don't have time to read your 40-page research paper with all the references and the footnotes and all the rest of it, and then they get to your equations and they stop reading. It's now saying, how do I make that information understandable to someone who does not have that background without dumbing it down? This is not food systems for dummies. This is food systems in a way that communicates to other people. And then lastly, there's that science communication, a blog, an opinion piece, a video, something which allows you then to reach out beyond that, and recognizing that ultimately the people we are trying to serve and the people that we're trying to learn from are not academics. They're not necessarily decision makers. They are farmers and they are consumers. And that's what that last component is all about. To do this, we needed to think in a systems approach. At the heart of FSNet is a systems approach to understanding something. I was privileged on Wednesday to hear Mary Scholes, who has spoken, I think, to you, one of the leading thinkers in systems analysis, deliver a very impressive address to the Academy of Science of South Africa. And the thing that she emphasized there is you can draw blocks like we have here, the institutions, the food system itself, its outcomes, and you can put arrows between that, but that's not systems thinking. The critical thing in systems thinking is the feedback, how these interact with one another. And what is I think quite unique about the FSNet framework for understanding systems is that we recognize that there are feedback loops. You propose an intervention, it takes place, farmers behave in a different way, but that impacts upon the quality of the land and the way the markets work. But what we recognize, which comes out of system thinking, is there are feed-forward loops. We can anticipate that and we can intervene. We can anticipate that encouraging intensification of agriculture is going to have an impact upon our water usage. We can feed forward and then think, do we raise dam walls? Do we think about understanding alternative ways of irrigating that don't use as much water? And do we think about developing plants which don't require as much water or which can survive heat, drought, and salinity? That's to the essence of these loops. I think another thing that we've debated a lot about in the FSNet framework, because it was a framework to understand the African food system. And we've had to sit back and think, well, what is an African food system and how many Africas are there and who's Africa? and whose vision of Africa, all of these things we've had to debate. It's, in a sense, a framework to understand the African food system is in fact a profoundly political statement. It's not just about science, it's about the politics of who's Africa. Who are the Africans to do this? And so the thing which I think, again, is different about our framework is that insertion in the middle there of institutions. Now this, I think, has hurt the heads of many of our colleagues from the natural sciences. It hurts my head because I'm an economist. This comes from sociology. And this is then about what are the different kinds of structures that inform our value systems, that inform the systems of our rules, that inform how we create knowledge. Those are institutions. And because it's sociology, guys, that means an institution is not the same as an organization. An institution is not necessarily FSNet or the University of Pretoria, although the University of Pretoria has an institutional role. It fits into the cognitive space of our framework. It's how we think, how we decide to build knowledge, the values that we have when we build knowledge. All of that is contained within the University of Pretoria, in addition to faculties and departments and schools and programs. So that's why we've left institutions there. I think institutions are important anywhere, but I think institutions are profoundly important in Africa. Because here we also have institutions of kin, of family. These also matter a great deal when you're trying to introduce food system change. And how these institutions interact with one another is something I think we're trying to understand. It's the energy, it's the pulse, it's the life of a food system. Importantly, institutions affect how we mitigate or intensify the impact of how a food system operates on the outcomes. I've put 4 there, which I drew from the Sustainable Development Goals. But typically we talk about food system outcomes as being obviously food and nutrition security, feeding our population safe, nourishing and healthy food, but also livelihoods. The agricultural economy and agribusiness generates significant livelihoods, and particularly they are livelihoods that people who are poor are able to obtain. So we cannot forget the livelihood outcome of a food system. The third then is sustainability. We know that our agricultural production presents us with the risk of damaging our environment and damaging our environment permanently. It contributes towards climate change. We can think about how to adapt our production processes so that we don't go that route, that we instead go for a regenerative form of agriculture. That's where this fits in. That's where our theme of agroecology fits in. And lastly, something which characterizes particularly South Africa, but many African countries, is issues of inequality. The inequality between rural and urban areas, the inequality between our former homelands and the commercial areas. All of these are important to drive our network. So, this is our call to action. It's recognizing that the HLPE had a call to action promoting a transition to agroecology. It's been endorsed at the highest level, and it emphasizes that transitions to agriculture are going to have to be context specific, like what we're doing in FSNet. It shows that we're going to also need to have significant changes in the policy environment to be able to make such changes. There's a definition of agroecology which emphasizes the importance of understanding the entire food system, which is what we're doing in FSNet. That it's a science, so it's also how you as natural scientists and social scientists construct knowledge. It's a practice, it's what happens at the farm level, how farmers make certain decisions in how they produce. And then there's also a movement part of it. There's a political process about how do we change a world at the moment where we have been on an unsustainable path, an approach where the very economics of it are leading to it to be unsustainable in the future. So that is ultimately how we're thinking about what agroecology is. We've taken a framework developed by Steve Gleisman, which is quite a well-known theorist of agroecology, which says it's not that you do agroecology or you do not. There are different levels, and we move up those levels. So at level 0, we do nothing. We continue as we have been doing. We use conventional methods without a regard for the environmental impact of those. And we move up those different levels where we increase the efficiency, but by looking at what are the agroecological interventions that we can adapt. We start looking for alternative practices. We can think about zero-till as an example of something which actually works. You can still make money, but is a better practice. We can start thinking about how do we interact the different parts of of the ecosystem, the water, the energy and food nexus, which is often spoken about. Increasingly, we're now starting to talk about food, energy, water, and waste. So we can start thinking about that. And then we start engaging with policy, and ultimately the hope is by doing these things, by moving up the level, we start to come up with an entirely different way of operating our food system. There's policies that we're already doing, that are already available, that allow us to do that. We can extend credit to farmers, to make credit easier for farmers that are adopting agroecological practices. We can give accreditation. We can give you a certificate that persuades your consumer that your product is safe and safe for the environment. We can speak to consumers. We can persuade consumers that it would be better to buy a different product. We can give tax exemptions, 0 rate on products which are produced in different ways. We can influence our markets. We can directly procure different food, the food that you had last night as an example, so that we are encouraging those that are involved in agroecological practices to continue. We can influence trade. We can say, you cannot use this particular chemical if you wish to import to our country. That's already happening. Some of the delays in our citrus industry are because the European Union made decisions about what is an acceptable chemical to spray and what is not. And then there's ourselves, the researchers, providing us with funding and incentives to do research and move forward on particular issues which relate to agroecology rather than those that do not. We can adopt innovations, and then key, as we're doing in FSNet, we can think about how do we do co-production with the farmers, with the policymakers, with the private sector, and transfer that information. How do we work with those companies that are currently making their money out of producing chemicals that we know are harmful, and persuade them to develop other technologies that need not be as harmful and still make a profit? I was challenged last night at dinner by a colleague from Grain SA who said, ultimately, for the farmer, it's the bottom line. And in South Africa, we have a cost-conscious consumer who's not going to pay extra just because you happen to have sprayed some organic thing rather than using something which was efficient. And I think that's the concern where we felt, again, this webinar is important to push the discussion that when we talk about agroecology, we're not saying give up science, step back. We're not saying revert that you need to be organic, meaning that you make no use of chemicals. It's actually science intensive. We had Shilidzi will remember, we had a lovely presentation by a leading agribusinessman who is involved in the farming of citrus, and he said, the first thing I do each morning, I fly a drone. The next thing I do, I collect the information from that drone, I put it in my cell phone, it tells me which tree has a problem. I then fly a second drone out that goes and sprays that problem, that piece of fruit. To me, that's agroecology. That's still using the chemicals, but exactly what we need only. So I wasn't able to get into the full discussion last night, but I wanted to say to my colleague, you can adopt an agroecological approach and you're probably going to make more money. You're going to be profitable. You might not be profitable next year, but this means that you'll be profitable in 10 years' time. And farmers think long term. So that's all I wanted to offer you. A brief whiz through what FSNet-Africa is, just so to remind you. A longer discussion on what agroecology is and why we thought it was an important topic today. A reassurance that this is not, in fact, leaving out the scientists. This is saying you have an absolutely critical role to play to be able to allow us to farm to process and to consume better. Colleagues, we now move on to the next step. You've heard a little bit about agroecology. Now we think it's important that you hear about the Arua Partnership, which is the umbrella under which this entire process is being developed. For that, we have Dr. Emmanuel Abbey, who has been advising the Arua network, and he's going to talk to us about the value of partnerships and why we have adopted a partnership approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I hope you can hear me. So good morning, my name is Emmanuel Abe, and I work with the African Research Universities Alliance, and I'm happy to share with you today our understanding of partnerships and what it means for sustainable and equitable food production. And again, let me take this opportunity to thank the organizers of this very important occasion, marking part of the activities of World Food Day. I mean, the Center for Sustainable Food Systems in Pretoria is one of the centers that Arua holds very, very highly, simply because of some of the things that they have been doing. And FSNet-Africa is one of the things that our Secretary General holds very highly, almost everywhere where he goes and talks about food systems. FSNet is something that he really talks about. So let me thank the organizers for marking this very important occasion. So I would just, the main message or the main thing that I'll be talking about when it comes to this partnership is how Arua came about, how some of these things should be dealt with. And when Professor May was speaking, he spoke about the challenges that African countries have had, issues of poverty, food insecurity, inequalities and all that. From Arua, Arua as a network was formed with the understanding that these challenges easily become transnational, and COVID has showed us a very clear example of how some of these challenges easily become transnational. And it is important that we use a very collaborative approach to deal with some of these challenges. And just a benefit of a hindsight, Arua is not the first network to talk about partnerships. Partnerships have been talked about severally. In fact, most African universities came into the global limelight because of partnership. But one of the challenges we've seen with some of the earlier partnerships is that, for instance, that one of the issues that is easily seen is this issue of brain drain, where universities come into partnership with African universities. They send our students to Global North, and then some of them don't come back. Those who come back, they find it extremely difficult to work in African universities. I mean, we can't blame the African universities so much, but Arua thinks that it is important that we start thinking about these things a little bit differently. And Arua was formed in 2015. For the past 7 years that we have been in existence, we've tried a model that defines a new form of partnership, where now we are saying that partnership should be about equitable and sustainable partnerships. Whoever we partner with should share in our challenges, should share in our visions, should share in our goals, should be interested in making sure that however they deal with our challenges become locally owned. Knowledge creation becomes locally owned. And our understanding of pursuing that is to go along this thing called clusters of excellence. We believe that interdisciplinarity is something that can easily be dealt with if we look at clusters of knowledge. So that is the main message that I'll be sharing today, and I'll take you through one of the very few partnerships that Arua has had. So just as an outline of my presentation, I'll give an overview of the Arua network and then our partnerships with the UKRI, which has given birth to FSNet-Africa, and then what are the new conversations that Arua is trying to pursue when it comes to pursuing future partnerships. So as I said earlier on, Arua was formed in 2015. It's about universities in Africa coming together, so 16 of them coming together to deal with some of the challenges that the Africa continent is having. And the 16 vice chancellors who initially met to talk about this network felt that no single university in Africa has the capacity to make a huge difference. More or less, if it comes to creating who the knowledge producers are, the PhDs, no single university can effectively produce the number that we need to deal with most of the African challenges. So it is important that we do come together. we leverage our scarce resources. We use that to get a lot more partnerships, all right, so that we can deal with some of the challenges that the African continent is facing. So that is how the ARWA network itself came into being. And then, so one of the clear vision that ARWA seeks to attain is to make the researchers and institutions globally competitive, while contributing to the significant generation of knowledge for the socio-economic transformation of the African continent. Prior to 2015, for more than 2 decades, the total contribution of Africa to global knowledge production happens to be just below 1%. Gradually came to 1.5%. Then around 2017, 2016, some researchers from CREST said, well, it was rising. Science in Africa was rising to somewhere around 3%. And in 2 weeks' time, ARWA, we've done a research on how our universities are doing up to 2021. And I'm happy to share with you that it is on this rising trend. Currently, we are seeing the contribution of African researchers to knowledge production globally to be between 5 and 6%. This is something we'll be sharing in about 2 weeks' time when our vice chancellors meet. And we see that as an important progress and part of the things that ARWA has been doing. We are seeing success in some of the things. It may be early days yet, just seven years, but we believe in about a decade time, we should be able to hit the 10%, the 20% of global knowledge production. So our mission as to how we think we can pursue our vision is to strengthen these universities through capacity building, all right, through capacity building, from us working together with the belief that if we want to deal with the issue of food security, it's all about us coming together as a cluster to deal with it, simply because no single university can do it on their own. All right, so ARWA has been pursuing a lot of collaborations, a lot of equity. And let me just indicate that most of the partnerships we are focusing on now, our focus is to ensure we increase academic rigor and relevance in dealing with most of the challenges that the continent faces. So you see that most of our activities have been revolving around the Sustainable Development Goals, all right, of which food security is one of the key things that we talk about. So we've had a lot of partnerships. But the ones I'll just talk about the partnership that we have with the UK Research and Innovation, UKRI. And then just at the end, I'll finalize my talk by talking about how our collaboration with the Guild of European Universities, which seeks to enhance further the collaborations that we've done with the UKRI. And then OSF, they've helped us to do it, our vaccine house. I will not talk too much about the OSF, but I'll talk a lot about the UKRI and then the Guild of European Universities. So in 2018, the ARWA and UKRI came into an agreement. The idea is if we were, the contribution of Africa to knowledge production was just about 1%, then there was the need for us to enhance significantly science and research across African universities. So that is what brought ARWA and the UKRI into some form of conversation. The idea was to rely on the GCRF fund to be able to enhance collaborations. And what makes this collaboration very unique is that and UKRI was very grateful to ensure that we limit ourselves to South-South collaborations. So universities in Africa and talking within themselves and then more or less getting advice from other universities outside the continent. And I'm happy to see that University of Leeds is one of the universities outside Africa that is helping FSNet-Africa to more or less pursue their goal of dealing with the issue of food security. Okay, so the idea behind the UKRI, one other idea behind the UKRI conversation that ARWA has had is for us to ensure that there is equity. All right, there's equity in there. So so now we don't have a situation where universities in global north are leading the research and Africans are relaxed and just become data collectors. All right, we have a situation where now Africans are leading in identifying the challenge that they want to address. They are leading in dealing with those issues. And what is more important is that there's local ownership of the knowledge creation that is happening within the network. All right, so UKRI, GCRF thing was more or less to boost research systems in most African universities. So UKRI has been very grateful they supported 13 centers of excellence, 7 for the sciences, 6 for the non-sciences, and then food security is one of them. We know the partnership is coming to an end, but we are still in talk with the UKRI to see how best this can be taken forward. All right, so I talk about, so more or less the partnership with UKRI led to 2 strands of research or programs. We have the capacity building, where the idea is to help African researchers, students, to be able to move in between the continent, to share ideas, to share knowledge. Before we have 4 research strands, and FSNet is one of those research strands. And the idea is to focus on the issue of food and food systems in Africa. I know Professor May has spoken about it. Professor Pell too will talk a lot more about this food system. So let me just concentrate on how we think going forward, partnerships should be focused on, and I hope it's something the food system, I know for sure that it's something they are leaning towards and making sure that most of their partnerships are equitable, sustainable. So we are saying that, we at ARUA, we are saying that henceforth, most of the partnerships that our universities should be undertaking should be focused on what? Equitable partnerships, whether it is at the global, regional, national, or local levels. Whoever we partner with, they should believe in our principles and values. We should have common goals. We should share in the visions. After all, the most important thing is that most of the challenges, when it comes to food systems, most of the challenges associated with food security are transnational. There's no need for us to isolate, work in silos, isolate ourselves as Africans to deal with just the African way. It should be possible for us to have some co-creation of knowledge, and that's the new model, that new business model that ARUA is trying to preach. It should be a complete rethinking and reorganization of the approaches that we've seen earlier, where it may not be deliberate, but it led to some form of brain drain. Now the idea is, how do we bring the brain back and talk about brain gain so that Africans gain in the knowledge? So we are saying that any new conversations about partnerships should be focusing on people working together, jointly owning the knowledge. If it is labs, it should be locally owned, co-owned, so that it shouldn't be the case where researchers from the global south go to the global north, go and do all the stuff there. When they come back, they are not able to do anything. All right, and then they are eager to just go back to wherever they went to do their studies. So we are saying that the new conversations about partnerships in Africa henceforth should be focusing on establishing research centers that are embedded in institutions in the global south. They should be in Africa. If you are establishing a lab that deals with food systems, it should be in Africa, and in that way, the ownership of the knowledge becomes local and becomes integrated in the systems so that's one of the very new things that in almost all the conversations that we are having with any partner or any institution that's willing to partner with ARUA. That's the focus, and it's something that we strongly encourage the FSNet-Africa to keep that in mind as they expand their partnerships. And then we are saying that in doing this research partnership, we should not divorce them from teaching. No, it shouldn't be different from teaching. There should be institutional partnerships must be grounded on instructions through joint courses. It should be possible for University of Pretoria to lead in developing a course that deals or addresses problems with food security, but it should be possible for somebody from, say, University of Nairobi to come benefit from that research center that has been established in Africa. Currently, we know that the practice makes it slightly difficult because of accreditation issues and all that kind of thing. We know that it makes it slightly difficult. And again, some of the things we saw when we were trying to understand how partnerships have worked previously is that we saw that some of them happen to be short-term, and right at the end of the partnerships, whatever conversation that started kind of dies and it does not continue. So ARUA believes that in going forward, when we are entering partnerships, it should be long-term, all right? So one of the things, when we're discussing our partnership with the UKRI, it was very clear from the beginning that they were interested in a very long-term partnership with us. Also with the Guild of European Universities, they are saying that whatever discussions that we intend to have shouldn't be short-term. And let me talk a little bit about these clusters of research excellence that we are currently focusing or putting a lot more attention on. And the idea is that the old university practice or the institutions that we have in Africa, it's very difficult to even find researchers moving from one department to the other department to work. But when you come up with this idea of clusters of excellence, say clusters of excellent research on, say, food systems, it should be easy for somebody from sociology, say at Stellenbosch, to be part of that particular network and contribute. And that is all interdisciplinarity is all about. That is what ARA believes. So ARA believes that henceforth, when we are going to enter into partnerships, we should be interested in clusters of excellence. And we are saying that it's again important that some of these things are very much sustainable. We don't think about partnerships that are going to benefit Africans and our generation just today, but also those of future generations. So we should address support systems around research, which will support the institutionalization of local funding. All right. So one of the documents that ARA had currently put forward, we saw that most of the contributions of our own governments, African government, towards research on the continent is very negligible, and it limits most of our researchers to just focusing on coming up with new course outline, not really to undertake research that is relevant and has an impact. All right, so that's some of the things that we are saying that we need to make a deliberate effort to place universities from the global south and their potential contribution in the center of most of the discussions that we are having. So I'll just conclude by saying that ARA believes that the problems are transnational, and the best way to deal with it, and the most important thing, best way to deal with it is through collaborations, no duplication of efforts. We come together as a unit, and then we can deal with most of these challenges. We are saying that for the sake of our collective future, we need to rethink the principles and approaches that has led most research collaborations between the global north and then the global south. And we are saying that an effective response requires strong commitment to global partnerships, not just from research institutions and academia, but other sectors. Okay, other sectors, and I'm happy to learn yesterday in one of the discussions, I'm told there's someone from the industry, a real farmer, who is coming to share her experience as to how we can deal with food systems. This is something ARA believes should be the way to go when it comes to new partnerships. So we think collaboration, we at ARA believe that collaboration is indeed the way and the best way. Partnerships are indeed the best way that we can deal with most of the challenges on the African continent. So I will end my speech here, and I will just say thank you once again to everybody, and then I will hand over to Professor Alex Pell as he introduces the next speaker. Thank you very much.
So I once read about an academic who decided to rewrite his entire CV, where he would focus on the things that he had failed. And I've actually been quite keen to do that to my own CV so that I could write into my CV that I once failed to get a $100 million grant in co-writing a proposal with Alice Pell. Because at least then I could say that I wrote something with Alice Pell. It gives me a great pleasure to introduce Professor Alice Pell. She is the Professor of Animal Nutrition, directed the Cornell International Institute for Food, Agriculture and Development, and was the Vice Provost for International Relations. She was a Steers Fellow at Stellenbosch, which I think is when we first met, and an extraordinary professor both at the University of the Free State and at the University of Western Cape. She is currently a visiting professor at the University of Pretoria and is affiliated with Future Africa, the venue which you're now located. She has degrees from Harvard in architecture, in international education, and a PhD in animal nutrition from the University of Vermont. She's also a farmer, as I recall. She works in interdisciplinary education and research with Zamorano University as the chair of the Trustees Academic Committee, with the University of Pretoria, and a fellow of Uganda's National Academy. Alice, we welcome you to give us the keynote address. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Julian, and I'm delighted to be here. COVID has meant that I've been out of Southern Africa for about 3 years or 2.5 years, which is longer than I have since I was 20 years old, so I'm glad to be back. Today, I'm going to be talking about sustainable food systems, but I'm going to focus on one aspect of it that actually hasn't gotten much attention so far, and I think it's a critical piece of what we're doing. No. First of all, you'll notice in my talk, I'm going to put a lot of emphasis on problem solving. And we have a few grand challenges that we really have to deal with. Number one has already been discussed somewhat. We have 828 million people who are undernourished, and that number has been going up since the pandemic. Before the pandemic, we were actually making some reasonable progress, but we've stopped and we're going downhill. Equally, we have a problem that about 39% of the global population is either overweight or obese. That's as much of a health problem as undernutrition. Both overnutrition and undernutrition are related to poverty. We forget that the cheapest source of calories are white sugar, white flour, and cooking oil. You cannot get a balanced diet from those ingredients alone. So we need to be looking at that. The figure that's particularly worrisome is the obesity, because that means heart disease, that means diabetes, that means shortened lifespan. And so that's challenge number one. Challenge number two is climate change. The cottage in the upper left-hand corner was my family's. Unfortunately, a day after this picture was taken, it went out to sea. The drought in East Africa, the hurricanes in Puerto Rico, and the floods in Pakistan. I could spend the rest of my time talking about the different aspects of climate change. We have got to do something about it, and we have to do it now. We can't wait for 50 years. This chart, when I came across it, was one of the most depressing things I have seen. The reason why it says off the charts is that the inequality between the richest people on this planet and the poorest is so great that they can't put the wealth of the richest on the same graph. In this, it indicates that 1% of the world's population controls 38% of the wealth. The top 20% control 76% of the wealth. The bottom 50%, 2% of the wealth. You can't run a planet this way. We've got to figure out a way to address this challenge. So our problem here is to figure out, A, what the problems are. And we're really good at looking at little problems, but we've got to look at big problems and figure out, how do we deal with inequality or climate change? And we need to do it through many of the things that both Emmanuel and Julian have talked about. It's very exciting to me to see FSNet working to integrate the study of the food system. And the model that they've got is an excellent one. The one thing that, I guess I'll ask the question, has anyone met a person who doesn't eat? No. Therefore, the population of the planet, everybody is a member of the food system. That means that everybody needs to understand the food system, whether they're a consumer a producer, a researcher, everybody has got to be involved in food system education. Let's think about our primary schools. How much do our kids learn about nutrition? Not nearly enough. So we need to move on. But we're using a university structure that was started in the 12th and 13th centuries in Europe. We've made a lot of changes. Everyone knows that we went to Zoom really quickly when we were all locked up. But we still have a lot more changes to make. And one of those changes is to open our doors enough so that what we learn gets out, but all the other people get to come in and do their own learning. So we've got to look at the way we organize ourselves to provide education. Remember a couple of slides ago, I said we have to educate the world. That's kind of ambitious, and we've got to figure out how to do it. This area is probably the least well-funded area of education. Community education, extensions programs are just a subset of that, but we've got to get word out to the people in a way that they have input in determining what is given to them in terms of education. So we have to look at that whole system. We've talked a little bit about integration of the food system, and there are lots of different parts. It's complicated, but you'd say, well, what's the relationship between grain production and home food preparation? Well, if the farmers are growing the wrong kind of rice, it may take twice as long for the person cooking the rice at home. So we've got to make sure that all of the connections are made. The problem with that, as a person who does modeling, is this was what my models end up looking like. They're spaghetti models. And spaghetti's good, but it's not that nutritious, and it's very confusing. What we need to do is to sort of back up and figure out, as I said, what problems are we studying, and then how are we going to determine those relationships between the different parts of the system that we're working with. This means a whole new group of analytical techniques that help us uncover those relationships. No longer are we asking the analysis of variance, is treatment A better than treatment B? We're living in a much, much more complicated world that we have to take many things into consideration. This is incredibly important because it's so easy to say, you know, chocolate's better than strawberry ice cream, but it's kind of meaningless. So we've got to spend a lot of time figuring this out. And this is the kind of thinking that we shouldn't start saying when somebody comes to university. The kids in standards 1, 2, and 3 ought to be thinking this way. And we've got to figure out how to get that put into their curriculum. And then we come to the integration of the education system. The other night I was having dinner, and I knew I was giving this talk, so I asked some people from the University of Pretoria, if I were a microbiologist and I wanted to find a sociologist on campus, how hard would it be for me to get from my office to that person's office? I didn't get an answer, they just laughed. Our offices still are in silos. One story I heard years ago was, it was called Sadie Hawkins Day, which is a sort of US term, but on one day a year, all of the offices at the university were occupied by different people. Or actually it's a week. And so that Julian would have found himself in physics, Melody would have found herself in French literature. And suddenly people said, oh my God, they're different from me. Not everyone thinks the way my group does. We've got to figure out ways to bring these groups together so that they come up with coordinated programs. I kind of liked this idea that interdisciplinary programs, if the disciplines or organs of the body, then real interdisciplinarity is the blood. It flows through all the organs, it's liquid, it's not contained, everybody's immersed in it. And that would be a goal for us, but how do we get there? Well, the first thing we need to do, and I don't think we think this way very often, when we design a course, we very quickly get through that. Or is somebody going to learn communication skills? Is somebody going to learn analytical skills? We get right down to the meat, which equations, which theories they're going to learn. We've got to take that step back because we have to include everybody in our education system. Number one, how long is the University of Pretoria's strategic plan? 5 years? Usually they're 5 years. We have a hard time thinking beyond 5 years. That is nice because we've got good hard data and can be relatively clear that we are going to be able to achieve our goals, and you never want to fail in meeting the goals of your strategic plan. So you set your sights kind of low. The problems we need to solve, climate change, we need to be thinking 50 years in the future. I grew up along the coast in the United States, as you saw. The city of Boston is now thinking 50 years ahead because they know the Atlantic Ocean is going to flood a good part of our city. We've got to continue to do that. One of the nicest examples I know that's much more close to home, how many people in this room know of Paul Farmer? He is a medical doctor at Harvard Medical School who did the best community medicine of almost anybody I've ever seen. He worked on drug-resistant tuberculosis and early HIV clinics. His first work was in Haiti. He worked in Rwanda, he worked in Peru, he worked in many parts of the world. Whenever he went to meet with people to talk about a village, the first thing he looked at when they were choosing sites, well, central location was critical, but were there trees around, and could the trees be retained as the clinic was built, because the most important part of the clinic from his perspective was not having people sit in the very hot sun when they're feeling ill. That kind of thinking has got to get built into our education programs and all the other programs we're talking about. The other problem is we've all got to learn how to work together. And it's hard. This example that I have here is a project that we ran in northern Bolivia, high in the Andes, pretty tough agricultural area. And we thought we had done a great job. It was a project that was integrating nutrition and agriculture. And we thought, you know, we'd had joint workshops, we did everything we could think of. This was the end of phase one. It was the celebration. And this was the final picture. Where do you think the agriculturalists are? There. Where do you think the health workers are? There. Where do you think the project managers are? There. You wonder why there are two tall men at the back of the nutrition group? They were the Cornell students. they got misplaced or put out on the edge. I've included this example because this really was a pretty well-run project. We had made some progress in breaking down some of the gender issues in this project were particularly severe. Women did most of the hand cultivation, but all the agriculturalists were men. And because the men did the plowing, if animals or in a few cases rototillers were involved, that was men's work. So we've got to be realistic about what we can do and come up with clever ideas to make people feel comfortable working together. So what are the other things we want our education system to do? Well, this one sounds sort of strange, that we really want students to learn how to direct their own learning. Each one of us only has a little brain, and it can't fit everything into it. I mean, sometimes I read too much and my brain gets full. We've got to figure out how you allow people to decide what they're going to put into their own brains and that they have the skills to go and get what it is that they've decided that they need. The educational term for this would be self-directed learning. But we want self-reliant learners who can go out after they're finished their education and find new knowledge to meet their current problems. We also want them to have the ability to solve complex problems with both analytical skills and technical knowledge, and you have to have those interpersonal skills as well. But great plans are one thing, but we want to make a difference. And if we're going to make a difference, we have to have the ability to develop and implement plans and make them happen. Again, those human interpersonal skills are critical. Did you ever learn this stuff in school? Nobody ever, I mean, they talked a little bit about leaders and they were making us be good leaders, but we never sat in groups and solved problems. Some of the approaches to this are what's called competence-based education. Are any of you familiar with that? Basically what you do is, again, you define your problem. I'm really big on this problem definition. And then you create learning objectives. What are you going to put into your brain? That's a negotiated process. It isn't just a, you shall learn this. And then you develop a learning contract. The student actually has a learning contract with the instructor or instructors, and they meet the goals, but those goals are all defined in terms of skills. Not, I'm going to read Hamlet, but I'm going to learn how to explain how to make soap to people, or they're all measurable skills. Now, I made the point about we should have students determining what they put in their brains. Who does that currently? Is it professors? We all certainly like to think that we know what ought to be in other people's brains, but I don't know why we think we can do that. Employers, well, yes, you've got to get a job, so they have to determine it. Or parents who obviously know their children better than anybody else. But really, we ought to have control over our own brains, shouldn't we? In concert with the professors, the employers, and the parents. But we're not going to get independent thinking unless people have these skills. One of the advantages of this competence-based education is people have different learning styles. Some people love visual learning. Some people can put earphones on and hear. Some people have to be using their hands. With competence-based instruction and evaluation, what you can do is, let's say you're addressing a communication skills goal, you can get that skill through different approaches that fit your learning style. For people with learning disabilities, this is routinely what's done, but we need to make that work for everybody. It also means that because you can have people learning in different ways in the same classroom, then you can have people with different disciplinary backgrounds in your classroom, and that means that you're all learning from each other, which was one of the key parts of this whole thing. The idea that we have a physics department, we only put physics students in it, and then we have an English department and only put English majors in it, doesn't make any sense if we want to train people's brains. The student-developed learning contracts, I worked for a community college that was designed, it was a non-campus, it was like the Open University model, where there was, we actually had no campus, we had no full-time faculty, and the instructors were all community-based instructors. It was an amazing organization. The learning contract, and our faculty, or our students were mostly low-income people in a very rural area. The learning contract allowed them to learn through the process what skills they already had. There were people who didn't have a lot of self-esteem, and when they suddenly said, boy, I know how to do this, and I knew how to do this, and this, it was fabulous. And they were much better able then to set their goals and accomplish their goals. Graduation at that school was one of the most amazing things. Everybody came with their kids. The kids were all dressed absolutely fancily. They were carrying their parents' diploma around, showing everybody. It was a really impressive, fun event. And that assessment also provides documentation of student skills, so when they go on, they're able to get jobs and increase their skill base. Now, should we put people in straight lines and count out how many hours they spend in a course so we can award credit? Or should we have this contract system where we actually are focused on measuring skills? Which is going to make more sense in terms of people's ability to go out and perform new skills as they go forward. It's pretty clear that the time-based solution isn't the answer. I'm going to talk very briefly about a couple of projects that we've had at Cornell. One was it was a combination sort of problem solving and active learning project. It was started about 10 years ago. And the assumption was, first of all, brains aren't sponges that just soak up knowledge. We can't put a brain in a classroom and think that knowledge is just going to seep in. Brains need to be exercised to acquire knowledge. That's why the straight rows of chairs isn't such a good idea. But this active learning initiative was mainly directed at our first year introductory courses, the ones that had 300 students in them, that people did sit in long lines, and many of them were the first year science courses, so first year chemistry. Everybody did the same lab year after year after year. We started in a fairly unambitious way, trying to get students to work in groups in labs. We tried to give them results of experiments and make them figure out how the results had been arrived at. We tried to get more mental activity. We also did the same thing in lectures. Anybody who's studied attention span knows that that 1 hour course lecture time period is too long, and that you need to change activities. The attention span of adults is not that much greater than that of kids. So you make it so that you have, first of all, between classes, we have online discussions that students are expected to participate in, as is the instructor, to work through sort of thorny problems that they need to have answers to, and they need to consider a bunch of variables. Sounds like that's not going to make much difference. Students become really involved in these things. It's kind of neat. And then other thing is, the lecturer comes, gives a short bit of information, and then students immediately have to start using that information. Because the sooner you use the information that you're presented in a class, the longer it stays with you. And the third thing we did is turning exams upside down a little bit. Exams were given, the first part, people did it the same old normal way, independently doing it. They handed that paper in, and then they get into a group and work as a group to do the same exam immediately after the first one. And that makes exam taking actually a learning activity rather than something that makes people very nervous because they don't think they're going to do very well. Our job isn't to make people feel badly about themselves. So little tiny steps. The result was a whole bunch of good things happened with the students who had been in those courses. Better performance, better critical thinking. We had all sorts of questionnaires. Better sense of belonging to the university. Cornell's big and competitive, and first-year students think they were the sort of admissions mistake. Another good aspect of this was that it increased faculty discussion among fellow faculty members of what they should be doing in their classrooms. And is this working? Is that working? More student-faculty interaction and more student-student interactions. Currently, we have 80 courses being transformed in 19 departments across the university, affecting 5,000 students' lives. So these weren't big changes. The other thing that's important about this sort of active learning concept is that it works in community settings. There's no reason that you can't do it if you're teaching people things and how to knit and crochet. You can do it in the field just as well as you can do it in the classroom. We also have been working on trying to build the grand challenges into our curriculum. And this is part of our business school, where we've built in courses that include engaged learning. Actually, a group has come for many years. The original group has been coming mostly to Stellenbosch for many years. Students come during the January break, work with small businesses, and get a combination of the sort of theoretical knowledge of how to do engaged learning, practical experience, interactions with business owners, and then an assessment and write a report. This comes in all sorts of variants, not terribly innovative, but boy does it make a difference in what people think. A lot of times necessary to pull this together for the first few times. So it takes patience and commitment. The first couple of years are a lot of work. But Otherwise, we're just continuing that medieval education system. We want new ideas, and we want new ways of having education occur. So we ought to be thinking about food system education for everybody, equality, lifelong, sensitive to the planet, and looking forward. Thank you.
That brings us to the end of the first session, colleagues. I want to just check with the organizers. We are a bit over time. Can we still do a question and answer period? But I know that you have coffee and tea awaiting.
No, if it's, we can keep it very short, like 5 minutes.
Okay. Well, let me first check. Do we have any online questions as yet? And if nothing as yet. So I was going to say, colleagues, you've got 2 questions, and one goes on, and then we have one online question. But if we get any online questions, if there are people that would like to ask a question that are online, please post it. We will make sure that we pose it here. Any comment or question you'd like to direct towards one of the speakers, and please make it brief, not a new speech, but a question or a comment of something which you found really appealing. Jane, please.
Thanks, Julian. I was listening to all of you, and one of the issues that came up is policy briefs. And I've worked in government for a long time. And there's 2 advisory notes I want to make. First of all, politicians don't read more than 2 pages. They do not focus for more than 5. If you cannot sell in 5 minutes, don't try. The second thing is your entry into government to change policy becomes almost a lesson or a course that the university should do, because people don't know where to go. They might have good ideas, but that can't be landed because they've gone to the wrong door. Thank you.
Thank you. A perfect comment. Short, brief, and very informative. Do we have any other inputs? Commissioner TM, what have you made of it all today? First session. What is the problem that we're trying to solve? As Minister Gangobela always says to us before we start every session of the National Planning Commission, what are we trying to solve?
So for me, we are dealing with complex challenges, which are very interconnected. And the presentation from Prof. Pearl, I think, is saying that education is at the center of solving these challenges. And we need to start educating at a very early stage. Because when we try to harvest it downstream, already then we have lost a lot. So how then do we transform our education system before these cohorts get into the higher education? So we also need to focus then on the basic education that forms the building block or the fundamental in terms of making sure that the concept that we're saying that we need to look into the future to solve these challenges then are integrated in the child's mind at a very early stage.
Got a question. We have an online question, and I'll come back and I'll take yours right now. While I'm waiting for the online question, you can go.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I was wondering, from the Arua presentation, there was an emphasis on equitable partnerships. So I was thinking, how can a poor kid have an equitable partnership with a rich kid? How does that work? Thank you.
Okay, again, a perfect question. I'll bat that to Alice, and then, sorry, Elizabeth, there was an online question.
So we have a question, how do we move from developing siloed curriculum to an integrated one?
Okay. Alice, would you like to take the... let's... Oh, you got...
I think the part of it is the problem focus. If we choose problems, not bodies of knowledge, then you have a diverse group of people in the room trying to solve the problem, and you by definition have interdisciplinary activity and learning taking place. If you're just focused on a body of knowledge, you don't get that interchange. The other thing that's handy about the problem-focused learning is that it's much more amenable to the evaluation system that I was talking about, the setting objectives, developing a learning contract, and then determining about whether the learning really took place, whether students own those skills. And that's one of the areas where educators are appropriately criticized, is that we can say, yes, they sat in a classroom, I gave them a test, they achieved a score on the test, but no, I don't know if they can use that knowledge in the real world. And our job is that real world activity. It doesn't mean that you don't learn theoretical things, but you've got to learn how to apply them. So that I think the problem focus really works because people get excited about hearing new ways to engage in issues that they care about. So that you get a lot more student learning taking place, and that's the brain exercise. It's the sort of physical education for the brain. We want that to be happening. And it doesn't happen if you're just sort of sitting like this.
Our time is up, but we can't leave without answering a question about inequality. And so I'm not going to give a long answer, but I'm going to just put something to you. I suspect in this room, there are those of us that were born to poor families. Or if not born to poor families, maybe our grandparents were born to poor families. And yet here we are. So I don't think there's a clear answer to your question. But I think we are proof that we can actually solve that problem if we are put in the right environment and get the right support. If there are people who bridge between wealth and poverty, we I think are among the proof of that. Colleagues, there is refreshments. Where are they?
At the dining, so it's 10 minutes break, and then we should be back at 6:30. Let's try and be on time.
Okay. Can you defy the odds and do this in 10 minutes? We appeal to you. Please try. Thank you.